It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of TAXITV Live. Yeah, baby. I always feel so sorry for my guests. And my guest today is Serona Elton, and we have some things in common. I'm really glad that she's on the show today. She is the head of educational partnerships at the MLC. The MLC is the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which I learned about a year or so ago from Michael Ames, who's a 20-some-year friend of mine and one of the smartest people I've met in the music industry. He said, I can't believe you don't know what the MLC is. He explained it to me and connected me with the MLC, and they were a sponsor at the Road Rally this year and sent a woman named Jane Bushmaker to do a presentation who did a bang-up job because people came up to me and said, thank you so much for having the MLC here. So today, I've got Serona joining me, who is, I guess, for lack of a better word, the main mouthpiece for getting the word out.
And certainly one of them. There's a handful of us that do a lot of the speaking. Definitely. Absolutely.
And Serona also happens to be the head of the director of the music business program at the University of Miami Frost School of Music, which I was a business major and I think got enough credits to be considered a music minor. So very happy about that. Did I read somewhere that... Yes, go Canes, absolutely. And did I read somewhere that you're also director of admissions?
No. For a while, I was also the associate dean of administration, and that meant overseeing all the operations of the school. But after 5 years, including the COVID years, I passed that baton to somebody else, and my focus is exclusively on our music industry program from a university.
Well, it's... as everybody, I think, already knows, there are really a handful of schools that are kind of the power schools for music business and music degrees, and University of Miami, I'm proud to say, is one of them. I also noted that you were the past president of MIA, right? Which is the Music Industry Educators Association. Did I get that right?
Very close. Music, MEIEA, Music and Entertainment Industry Educator Association. It's a bunch of us music business professors. Exactly. So I did my time as a president of that organization. I'm still a very active member.
And you're an attorney. I don't know how you find time to do all this stuff. And by the way, that means that you and I may have been in the same room together. I was the keynote speaker at the MISA, which is the student version of MIA convention that was in South Miami on Kendall Drive probably 15 years ago.
Wow, interesting. We'll have to think back about that. So,
Rebecca
Chapel, probably.
Yes. I took Rebecca and a bunch of other people from the board, I think, out to lunch afterwards. I don't know. Anyway, I had a great time with them, and the students were just downright inspiring. I love it. When you get students in a music department are really passionate about what they do, and I think that a lot of students just go to college like, I'm expected to go to college. I'll take some liberal arts stuff and just kind of float through, and then, but people who go to music school are committed, and
absolutely.
I love the energy. So anyway, I missed the presentation that Jane did at the rally because I was in the ballroom doing whatever I was doing in there. But I want to start out by reading a paragraph that's on the front page or in the About section of the MLC's website. And frankly, I felt like I need to go back to school because it was a little hard for me to understand. I mean, honestly, I could figure it out. But then I thought, a lot of people just might not get this. I want people who are watching today to really understand this is something you need to do. So we're going to do a pretty deep dive and make it simple for you along the way. What it says on the website is the MLC administers blanket mechanical licenses for eligible streaming and download services in the United States, collecting royalties due under those licenses and paying music publishers and administrators example, a U.S. collective management U.S. collective management organization, CMOs, and self-administered songwriters, composers, and lyricists. So I jotted down some questions because not every taxi member is. They may be more musically inclined than music businessly inclined, so I want to break it down for them. So let's start with some of the basics. What exactly is a mechanical license?
So a mechanical license is, all licenses are a type of permission. So it is permission to take a song, and I'm very specific about the words that I use because when we start talking mechanical licensing, you have to really make sure you're clear in your mind between a musical composition and a sound recording. Those are not the same thing, right?
Right.
So what a mechanical license is permission to take a musical composition, make an audio sound recording of that musical composition, and then make that available in a handful of different ways, right? So, I don't know how far back you wanted me to go, but most people might.
We can not as far back as wax cylinders, no, but discs,
okay,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
we can,
because even wax cylinders needed mechanical licenses.
Right.
Exactly, right? So CDs, vinyl records, right? Physical records of various types, all of those require a mechanical license. And their sale of those generates mechanical royalties. Then we move into the digital era. Permanent downloads require a mechanical license and generate mechanical royalties. And then we moved forward into the streaming, and certain kind of streaming, on demand streaming, requires a mechanical license and generates a mechanical royalty.
So only on demand, not stuff that where you tune into a station and whatever it serves up, you hear. Correct. That. And why does that not need a mechanical?
So under the copyright law, there's actually a distinction. The on-demand streams are called interactive streams, and the other scenario you described is called a non-interactive stream, right? With an interactive stream, you as the listener are in charge of exactly what you're going to be listening to. You get to find that recording and press play. And when you're doing that under the copyright law, that involves a reproduction, distribution, and public performance. All of that is happening when you have that on-demand stream. And so that on-demand stream requires a mechanical license that is permission for the reproduction and distribution part of it, and a public performance license that is for the performance part of it. Whereas a non-interactive stream is considered to be only a performance, not also a reproduction.
Right, it's more like terrestrial radio.
Exactly. Just a performance. Whereas an on-demand stream is considered to involve a reproduction and distribution, even though, to the average person, you might think, well, I thought only like reproduction involves me getting a physical item or a permanent file, and that's not true. An interactive on-demand stream is a reproduction, a distribution, and a public performance, and requires a mechanical license for the reproduction and distribution part of that.
I should have brought my favorite prop to work today. Back when I worked at Criteria, which right there behind me, the love of my life, the place where I started my career, and I'm still very loyal. While they were mastering the Eagles' Greatest Hits, Volume 1, Alex Sadkin, who was the mastering engineer, was a good friend of mine. And one night I stopped in the mastering room on my way out of work. And he went, crap. And he blew one of the masters. And he gave me the actual master disc. And then eventually I got the stamper, the metal plate stamper that went with it. So I've got a rare collectible. I'm sure, only people like us would be interested in that, not the average person on the street. But I think it might still be the largest selling record of all time. And so I've got a blown master. Anyway, I digress. So what in this context is a blanket mechanical license?
Right. So let's just talk about a blanket license in general for a second, and then we'll talk about blanket mechanical. So licenses in the music industry are generally handled one of two ways. Either there's a license that is to use a very specific musical composition or a very specific sound recording in a particular way. And that license is for one single work. and I use the term work in this context, meaning one creative work, right? It's a license to use that song or a license to use that recording. Those are individual licenses. The other way that licensing is often handled is through the use of a blanket license. And what a blanket license just means is that whoever needs that license gives them permission to use often many thousands of whatever it is that's being licensed, right? So, for example, and I won't veer too far off, but just to contrast, when a radio station, or let's say a concert venue even, needs a blanket license from ASCAP or BMI for the performances that happen, right? That's a blanket license. They're not asking for permission one composition at a time, right? That's a blanket license that they get. Whereas synchronization use in film and TV is generally done on an individual license basis. Maybe there's one license for 2 songs, but you're not necessarily saying, here, use the whole catalog any way you want, right? Most sync licenses tend to be individual. So before the Music Modernization Act of 2018, and I know we're going to get a bit into that, before the law changed, all of the mechanical licenses generally were done on an individual basis, one at a time. But what we also had, so I'm gonna give you a second way to slice and dice.
Okay.
So one slice and dice is individual license or blanket, right? That's a slice. And then I'm going to slice it a different way and say voluntary license and compulsory license. Okay? Because that's another thing we have to understand before we can talk about the blanket mechanical. Licenses also are either voluntary or compulsory. And what that means is voluntary license means the party that needs one contacts the party that has the permission, that has the license, says, hey, can I have a license, please? And then that party says yes or no, and they negotiate, how much money and all that good stuff, right? That's a voluntary license. That's what probably most people that wouldn't know anything about our copyright law assume all licenses are voluntary licenses.
Right.
But actually, under the copyright law, there's a couple of instances where actually the law grants a license. And so the party that needs one doesn't go and ask, hey, can I have a license to use this song this way? Instead, if they follow all the rules in the law and the related federal regulation, they are granted a license as a matter of law, right? The law grants the license. And that's called a compulsory license. So what we've had in the US since 1909, or the passage of the 1909 Copyright Act, was we had most mechanical licensing was done generally on a one at a time individual license basis. And we have had voluntary licenses, which the majority of licenses in the industry are voluntary. But we also had in the copyright law a compulsory mechanical one at a time license, right?
Right.
And that was rarely used in modern, in the modern era, generally for cover records, right? A record label might decide or might ask for a voluntary license and be told no, and then decide, is the compulsory license available to me? And if so, do I want to, follow all those rules and use it? So that all was the case and has been for a long, long time. The Music Modernization Act came in and said that approach just wasn't working very well for digital in today's era. And so the law itself was modified, that compulsory individual license, to create a compulsory blanket mechanical license for digital music services to utilize. So, there's both the blanket piece, right? So now a company, and we'll talk more about this, like Spotify only needs one mechanical license that gives them permission to use all of the songs that meet the eligibility criteria, rather than them having to secure a mechanical license one song at a time. But it is also a compulsory license. The law is granting that permission, not the individual copyright owner.
And I don't think a lot of people understand that when you go listen to something on Spotify, they know they press play and they hear music. But there's one copy that lives on, and I'm simplifying this, but one copy that lives on Spotify's hard drive. And every time a different person, no matter where they are on the planet, clicks play, it instantaneously creates a new stream from that. Like if 10,000 people are all listening in the same moment, but they're all starting a split second different from each other, they're not all listening to the same thing. They're listening to 10,000 copies that have been generated. So that's where the mechanical aspect comes in. It is kind of like pressing a disc, but it's making a copy of that digital stream.
Yeah. It's a little more, has more to do with the fact that the user's in control than it does the technology. Because you could have 10,000 people listening to a non-interactive service, right? Like a digital radio service, who are all being served up the same thing at the same time
from that one file. Yeah,
it has a lot to. It's much more. Has a lot to do with the ability to control what you're listening to. Has a lot to do with it.
Okay, and it also, in that paragraph, mentions collective management organizations, which frankly I had to look up because it's talking about ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and what's the new one, the G?
Yeah.
They're normally called, in my world, PROs, Performing Rights Organizations, which most of our members know them by. And then it talks about, in that paragraph, self-administered songwriter, composer, or lyricist, of which many of our members are. Taxi has thousands of members all over the world. Is the MLC global in what it does, or is it just in the United States?
So it's just in the United States. But let me clarify that question, because I think what may, if you go back to the actual words, I think I can see where the confusion is, right?
Yeah.
So the MLC pays generally music publishers. Okay, pretty much everybody knows what a music publisher is. They pay the publishing administrator, and that is a company or party, right, that is handling the publishing administration, but perhaps not all of the publishing activities, right? Publishing activities can generally be thought of as either creative or administrative. And creative stuff is like, publishers help their writers get paired up with other writers for co-writes and have them participate in writers' camps, and they're pitching music to get used in film and TV and for recording artists looking for new material, right? A lot of that's the kind of activity we kind of will call creative publishing activities. But then there's a whole bunch of publishing administration activities that has to do with registering songs with performing rights organizations, mechanical rights organizations, the U.S. Copyright Office, right? Collecting and tracking income. That's all sort of publishing administration type of activities. So the MLC pays publishers. There are companies that call themselves publishing administrators, right? Or they are providing publishing administration services, maybe not all publishing services, just the administrative ones.
Right.
The MLC pays them. The third thing in the list there that you're referring to, you have to look closely. It says we pay ex-US, meaning outside of the United States, collective management organizations. Let me give you a simpler way to understand what that means.
Please.
There are mechanical rights organizations in other countries. Many other countries have a performing rights organization and a mechanical rights organization. In some countries, it's one organization. In other countries, they're separate.
Right. We had that here for years. Harry Fox and the PROs, right?
So Harry Fox was never really a mechanical rights society.
Okay.
It's not an equivalent. But so a good equivalent in the UK would be MCPS, for example. Okay. So the UK MCPS, let's say you're based in the UK, you're a publisher, and you sign up with MCPS in the UK, and you authorize them to collect your mechanical royalties from all over the world, right? That including the US. So in that case, if the song being played on a US service, if the rights holder of that song is a publisher in the UK, and that publisher has authorized the Mechanical Rights Society in the UK to collect for them on their behalf from all over the world, then we would pay that ex-US, meaning outside of the US, we would pay those mechanical rights societies based in other countries who are collecting on behalf of their members. So collective management organization, CMO as an acronym,
Yeah.
is an umbrella term that refers to the kind of thing that the MLC, ASCAP, BMI, Sound Exchange, MCPS, it refers to the kind of thing that all of these sorts of organizations do, which is essentially they are administering rights and royalties collectively on behalf of large numbers of rights holders. That's all that means. So another way of wording that would have been to say, we pay, foreign or internationally based mechanical rights society, right? And then the last category that I know we want to dive even deeper into is that self-administered songwriters, composers, and lyricists, right? That's our fourth category of who we pay. So what's important there is the self-administered part. So if you are, let's say I meet a songwriter on the street or at a conference and they say, Serona, do I need to join the MLC? I cannot give them a yes or no answer without asking them specifically for each of your songs that have been or are going to be soon recorded and then put up on interactive streaming services in the US. Who is the party that is administering the publishing? Right. And so let's say, and this is my newest example, right? Let's say I meet somebody and they've been doing this for a long time. And they go, well, okay, that's a good question, Serona. The first 10 songs I wrote, those were all part of a deal that I had with Sony Publishing. And Sony Publishing is the publisher, and they're going to be the publisher until those are no longer protected by copyright or I terminate and reclaim my rights. But those are still being handled by the Sony Publishing. And I would say to that person, well, if those are the only songs you've written, then the answer is no. You do not become a member of the MLC because the MLC will pay Sony Publishing for those songs. And then Sony Publishing will pay you your share of mechanical royalties based on your contract with Sony Publishing. And then they say, okay, all right. But then after that deal ended, Serona, I wrote another 10 songs. And for these 10, I signed up with Songtrust as my publishing administrator. So these next 10 songs, Songtrust is the publishing administrator. Now, do I join the MLC? And my answer is still no.
Because you've got an admin.
For the next 10 songs, those are handled by Songtrust. They're not administered by you, songwriter. They're administered by Songtrust. So for the next 10 songs, right, the MLC will pay Songtrust, and then Songtrust will pay. And they go, okay. But then I wrote another 10 songs. And for this last 10...
I would have left the party by now.
I know, right? And for this last 10, there's no Sony Publishing. There is no publisher. And I haven't signed them up with any publishing administrator. It's just me, like I am. I am the publishing administrator. So now do I join? And the answer is finally yes. In that scenario, because those last 10 songs that writer wrote, they are the publishing administrator, that means they need to join the MLC. But for those first 10 and that second 10, no. The publishing administrator in those scenarios was Sony for 10 and Songtrust for another 10 songs, right? So it's not like ASCAP or BMI. It's not like a PRO that pays half the money to the publishing administrator and half the money to the writer. That's not how mechanical royalties work. Mechanical royalties by mechanical rights societies are paid to the party handling the publishing administration. And then they pay the songwriter based on their contract with the songwriter. But if there's a songwriter who wrote a song and there is no publishing deal for that song, no administrator playing that role, then that writer joins the MLC because they are acting as the publishing administrator. That's why they would be joined.
So somebody who has music with a production music library that has signed them to an exclusive deal. The library is doing the admin on it, so the library would get paid by the MLC.
And the key there is to look in your contract with the library, right? To
Right.
confirm who has the right to collect mechanical, right? Who is actually acting as the full-on administrator. So yes, it probably is the library, but the key is to look at the actual contract. And if there's any question, you go back to the library and say, who is collecting the mechanical royalties for this, right? You need to be real clear with the library about that.
You know, there was a time in the music industry, Serona, back when I lived in Miami, where you could write 3 really good songs, get a record deal. A manager would beg you to manage, for them to manage you because you had a record deal, and you didn't have to worry about anything except writing great songs and doing great performances. It's really complex now, and this is why there is such tremendous value not only in what the MLC does, but in the music schools that teach this stuff. It's really important for musicians to understand that it's the music business. That it's, even if you wanted to open a hot dog stand on 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, you have to be licensed. You have to follow certain rules. You have certain business insurance, things that a startup requires. Nowadays, musicians in almost any capacity other than maybe just being somebody who plays in a bar mitzvah band, and that's all they do. Oh, anywhere else in music industry, you have to treat it like a business. You become a business. And it's really important that people understand this stuff. So thank you. And Laura Principato, I'm going to do Q&A a little later, but I've got a series of questions that I want to ask Serona here. So how long has the MLC been around, and who did this before the MLC?
Right. So the MLC was created because of the Music Modernization Act, right? Really important act that changed the U.S. copyright law in several ways with regard to music. The MMA, as we call it for short, we love our acronyms in this business, don't we? The MMA,
Right.
Music Modernization Act, it had 3 different sections to it, one of which focused on digital mechanics, right? The other 2 had nothing to do with this topic, but were also super important. So that was signed into law at the end of 2018. And the start date, if you will, the effective date for when that change was going to go into effect was January 1st, 2021.
Okay.
So from the time it was signed 2018, the MLC had to be created and get operational and ready to roll by January 1st, 2021. That is when that new way of doing things, the new blanket license, became available to digital services. And starting with streams in January of 2021, they started then reporting those royalties to the MLC. So what used to happen before the MLC went into effect was digital music services in the US, streaming services, they had to secure mechanical licenses. It was their responsibility. Actually, let me go back a little bit further to the download era just to help people understand what happened with streaming. So, back, we won't go all the way to wax cylinders, right? But back in the physical product days, right? CDs, vinyl, tape, right? Record labels have been the party that needed to secure a mechanical license. So as part of the process of deciding they were going to put an artist in the studio and get that record ready to release, right? Mechanical licensing happened. Mechanical licenses were obtained, and then royalties were paid once those things started selling.
Right.
So record labels had that responsibility. Then we moved to the permanent download era. And in the United States, we did it a little differently than most other countries around the world. We decided that in the US, yes, definitely you need a mechanical license to offer download. But what we did for the most part was we did not make services like iTunes have to get mechanical licenses. Instead, record labels that already knew how to do this and were generally already getting a mechanical license for the physical product, they would also at the same time get a mechanical license for the permanent download. And so the model that we followed for downloads, since really that business really came into existence in the US, was that a service like iTunes would sell a permanent download. They would keep their share of the money. They would then give all of the rest of the money just to the record label. And then the record label would pay a mechanical royalty to the music publisher. And then the music publisher would pay the song.
Okay.
And of course, the record label also would pay the recording artist and the producer. That's recording royalties. We're just talking mechanical royalties here, right? So that was the way things worked for downloads, like since the early 2000s, when, those became a thing. In other countries, though, they followed a different model and generally made those digital download stores get a mechanical license from a mechanical rights society, right? And those countries, most of them have mechanical rights society that could grant them a license that way. Not how we did it in the US. Along came on-demand streaming, right? In other words, interactive streaming, Spotify, services like that came into existence. And we as an industry said, we're going to do it differently. And now Spotify, for example, and services like Spotify, they have to secure a mechanical license. It's on them. The record label still has certain licensing obligations that it has to get handled to even be able to make the recording available, but the service itself has to secure a mechanical license. So when companies came into the US, started operating streaming services, they were like, you mean there's no one like place we can just go and get this license like there is in other countries? And the answer was no. And so a number of them looked around and said, well, okay, we don't have an army of humans big enough to do this. Who can we hire? Is there a company we can hire to help us with this, right? And so different streaming services hired some company names you might have heard of, right? So the Harry Fox agencies had like a different division of the company,
right,
that would secure licenses, right? Because Harry Fox agency, the sort of traditional version, would be the granting party, right? You would contact them to ask for a license. And if they were acting as the agent for a music publisher who voluntarily chose to hire them to be their agent, they could grant you a license. So this is different. This was not the granting. This was Spotify saying we need to hire somebody to help us secure licenses, like to get them on our behalf. So Spotify hired the Harry Fox agency, a different division of it, to secure licenses like it was working for Spotify. Other services hired MRI, music reports, for example, right? These were very obvious, companies that knew how this works in the US. So a lot of licenses were obtained, a lot of royalties were paid out, but there was a lot that was not working. A lot of rights holders were not getting paid. There was no one central place that you could point everybody to go and get your song registered in order to, opt into these licenses. And so small publishers and self-administered, in other words, self-published songwriters, didn't know how do I get in on this, right? How am I supposed to get this money?
Who's got the time?
Well, that too, but where would you even look, right? Where do you go to this? So ultimately it was not working. There was a lot of, unhappy rights holders that brought lawsuits. The NMPA brought lawsuit, entered into a big settlement with Spotify and some other services. The services don't like to get sued. That's not good for their business either, right? It's not a good business model. And so, rights holders were unhappy, the services were unhappy, and that's what led all the industry, components to come together, all the different parties to come together and really reach this grand bargain that became the music modernization. So before the MMA, each service had their own way of securing mechanical licenses, and hired a company to help them. And big companies, sure, they were getting paid, but sort of middle and small folks were missing out on a lot of this money.
So where did the money go if it wasn't being collected?
Yeah, so the law also contemplated that question and had a great solution for that. So what the law did, the MMA is when I mean the law, what the Music Modernization Act did, was it acknowledged that things were not working and there was unpaid royalties. And so what it did was it gave the digital services sort of a get out of jail free card. What it said to them was, when this new way of doing things goes into effect, January 2021. If, right before then, like December 31st, 2020, right? If you're still sitting on unpaid mechanical royalties, digital services, after January, you can transfer all of those unpaid royalties and the related data to the MLC and avoid getting sued. So many companies did transfer that to the MLC. In some cases, that money goes all the way back to 2007, which is pretty mind-blowing. They transferred more than $420 or so million to the MLC, and we cleaned that data up, ingested it into our systems, and started being able to match that information they sent to the songs and the rights holders in our database. That's called matching. We started being able to do that and pay that out in the summer of 2022, and we've been paying it out ever since. We call those royalties, we have a special word for them. We call them historical unmatched, because they predate the new way of doing things.
Right.
So all the royalties we pay out on a royalty statement, we send out royalty statements every month, and on every statement, royalties are either marked as blanket royalties or as historical unmatched royalties.
So what happens if they remain unmatched? If there's never a connection, no attribution made, do you guys divvy it up?
That too.
Okay, I'm dying to know.
The law figured all this out. It's all in the copyright law.
Wow, they got something right in Congress for once.
It's kind of shocking, I know. Yeah. So what happens is, the MLC has to try to pay the right party for a minimum of 3 years. So somebody will always be able to go back in time with the MLC at least 3 years, minimum, always, right? We are also, though, allowed to keep trying for longer than 3 years, and longer is better for the little guy. Mm-hmm. And we have already decided that we're going to try for longer than 3 years, but we can't try forever, okay? So this is what will happen at some point. And by the way, that money is earning interest. That will be paid out as well, okay? You don't keep the interest. It's earning interest. So eventually what will happen, and by eventually I mean not in 2024, not in 2025, the soonest we're looking to do this would be in 2026, would be the first time that we would do sort of what is contemplated in the law as a market-based distribution. So what that would mean is we would take these unpaid royalties related to a particular time period. There'd be some analysis that happens as to who was entitled to mechanical royalties and how much did they get of all the mechanical royalties in the U.S. paid in that time period. There'd be some kind of market analysis. And certainly, if you're guessing, of course, the big companies, like the big publishers, are going to have a larger share of the market. But it's not like we're going to go to the top 5 and stop, okay? There's a lot of smaller publishers that got paid mechanical royalties during those time periods who would also be entitled to a proportional amount of this money. So there'll be this proportional analysis done, and then that money would get paid to the publishers and the self-administered songwriters, right, if they were entitled to that. And another really great thing for songwriters that's in the law is when that money gets paid to publishers, because at that point it's not associated with any particular song, right? It's sort of, it's this money that came from a pool of money. Okay. So they're going to get a lump sum. Publishers are required by law to split that with their songwriters. So
and do they do that proportionately as well?
So the law isn't real specific on how they're supposed to do all that. All that stuff is going to be being figured out over the next year or two. So it does say they have to share. I don't quote me because I could be wrong. I do think they have to share it 50-50 with the songwriters, but how they then decide which of their writers get it, I'm personally not sure of. I may have to reconsult Section 115 to see if it got into that or not.
I hope it's proportional, because otherwise it'll end up going into a slush fund and just go to, the songwriters that are on the board or something, the people that have the most clout, which would not be cool. Obviously, and I'm an advocate for the independent musicians, so I want to make sure they're treated well. I have a question about, so the 3 years, and you're going to go longer than that. What happens if, let's say it's 7 years, 10 years, and somebody surfaces, they didn't hear about the MLC, and they show up in year 11 and they come knocking on the MLC's figurative door and say, I want you to get my money for me. At that point, I'm guessing you guys did everything. It was kosher. You did it by, you followed the statute. And so are they out?
Go back in time 3 years.
Right.
But if at some point further back there was this market distribution and the money was paid out, then we don't get that for them,
Right.
But they'll always be able to go back at least 3 years, if not longer. And if that money was distributed because of a market distribution, they won't be able to claim it at that point. It's too late.
Okay. Wow, I'm actually starting to understand this. Look at some of my other notes here. Got that covered already. Oh, by the way, I'm not going to go down this exhaustive list for you guys, but just some of the organizations that the MLC works with. Amazon Media Ventures, Amazon.com, which is Amazon Music. I'm skimming the list as I read these to you. Apple Music, you've heard of them. Beatport, you've heard of them. Bill Graham Archives, that's an interesting one for those of us who are old enough to remember who Bill Graham was. Deezer, Fan Label, GrooveFox, Google Play Music, and YouTube, iHeartMedia, Music Choice. Ooh, I was a keynote at their annual shareholders convention or something one year. Pandora, who was also a sponsor at the Road Rally this year. Piano Tracks LLC. I noticed there were a couple on here like Piano Tracks where it's basically piano covers of songs or guitar covers of songs. And I guess I was loosely aware that these people existed. It's interesting to me that they fall on the list, but it makes perfect sense once you understand what it is that the MLC does. Sonos is on here, Smithsonian, Folkways, I remember those folks. Tidal, SoundCloud, Spotify, of course. So you guys get the idea. This is not some little rookie startup. This is the real deal. And Serona sent me a video, which you can also find on their website, but I want to play it for you. It's like a minute long, and it does a really good, simple explanation. I just want those of you who are signed to production music libraries, where you've assigned them the rights to your master and to your composition, they're going to take care of this. But for those of you who've created stuff on your own and put it on SoundCloud or on YouTube videos or wherever, and you haven't signed it with a library or a publisher yet, this is important for you. You're not going to get a check for $100,000. So it may not be life-changing, but are you going to say no to a check for $1,000? Probably not. And then you're going to go spend it on a guitar. No, put it in the bank. Let it make interest. All right, here comes the video.
You're a music creator and want to start making money off your music. So you sign up for a music distribution service that uploads your songs to the top platforms. Now, your songs are streamed by thousands of listeners every month across the United States. But you might not know that with every stream, you earn separate royalties as an artist and a songwriter. Although you get paid artist royalties by your distributor, many distributors do not collect and pay songwriter royalties. Your songwriter royalties are paid to music rights organizations. Performance royalties are paid to performing rights organizations. In the US, some of those are ASCAP, BMI, GMR, and CSAC. And digital mechanical royalties are paid to the Mechanical Licensing Collective, or the MLC. If you want to collect all of your US mechanical streaming money from your song, you should join the MLC. It's free to join and pays out 100% of the mechanical royalties that it collects on your behalf. And you will receive royalty payments monthly. So what are you waiting for? Join the MLC today and get paid.
And we're back. Okay, that was a great video, and it left me with a question that I started to write down, and now I can't see where I wrote it.
Well, I want to just add one thing though, for sure. I really think the safe thing for people to do if they have signed up with a production music library is to look at the contract to make sure that they are collecting the mechanics, right? You know, this comes up sometimes. I've been to the production music conference a few times, and I get these questions sometimes, and you know, I have seen different contracts, some that does, some that doesn't. So I just do think safest bet is to take a look. And if you're not clear, check with the library and say, who is collecting the mechanical royalty? Because, you know, they're generally being generated by services like Spotify and Apple Music, which, you know, may be quite different than what that production music library is trying to use your music.
Yeah, a lot of libraries will put the music out on YouTube or Spotify or wherever. And I'm sure that they do it to make, you know, they obviously want to monetize wherever they can.
Right.
So
let me also clarify YouTube. So YouTube has YouTube Music, which is an audio streaming service. Okay. And there are things on YouTube that sometimes people call art tracks, where it's a fixed image. It doesn't move.
Right.
A photograph or a piece of art, right, doesn't change, and audio is streaming. Those generate mechanical royalties. Videos on YouTube do not generate mechanical royalties. So the MLC is not collecting for YouTube videos.
Right.
Not from TikTok, not from Instagram and Facebook. All that video, once video's in the mix, it's not a mechanical royalty from the way we term things in the U.S.
What about a static image, but maybe has lyrics scrolling? It's a lyric video. Does that disqualify it as well?
Yes, because there's still a moving image, and lyric videos are different. Don't generate a mechanical royalty. They generate a performance royalty and like a social sync royalty, but not a mechanical royalty.
So how does the MLC make the money to keep itself alive and perform this function? This is also a really unique answer. You're not going to believe this. So the normal model, let me tell you what's normal, and then I'll tell you how we're special. Okay.
What's normal, right, is whether it's ASCAP, BMI, Sound Exchange, PRS for Music in England, MCPF, right? Performing rights organizations, mechanical rights organizations. The normal model is, let's say they collect $100. They're going to use between $5 and $10 of that 100 is going to be used to pay their operating.
Right.
That's not shady. That's how these things operate. That's normal, completely normal. The MLC, because of the very specific law that created them, it set it up differently. The digital services that use mechanical licenses completely separately from the royalties they have to pay us. Separately from that, they also have to pay in to cover our operating.
Wow, they didn't fight that tooth and nail?
It was all part of a big grand negotiation, right?
Wow. It's impressive.
Have to work. Ultimately, the obligation to get these mechanical licenses is their obligation. So the argument is, why should rights holders give up money to pay for this when the obligation is on you? So they separately pay for our operating costs. And that's great for rights holders, because it means if we collect $100, we pay $100. We don't keep any part of that to pay our operating.
So musicians who are inherently cynical and suspicious because they've been screwed in so many ways for so many years, they can't lose with the MLC because you don't take a piece of their anything. You can only do good for them.
It's free to join, and we don't take a piece of anything. So I know it can feel a little too good to be true, but look at Section 115 of the Copyright Law if you feel so inclined, and you'll see why. It's all right there.
Believe me, Taxi is now going to be 33 years old. People still think we sound too good to be true because nobody's ever done anything like this that wasn't taking advantage of musicians. So we have to live with their sad legacy.
Good to be cautious, because not everybody is above board. It's good to be cautious, but there are some really good things.
So what if I were a brand new, I'm in my first year of being a songwriter or a composer for reality shows, whatever. I'm just starting out my career. why wouldn't I want to join the MLC now? I mean, there's no point in not joining because you might forget to join later and then miss your window of opportunity. So let's say that I join and I fill out the form and then I start. Do I actually upload my music or do I just fill out a form that lists song titles and who the authors are and who the rights holders are? And assuming that's the case, because I'm getting a nodding head from you, they've got to be meticulous in the way they enter that data, because if they're not going to get a match and they're not going to get paid, right?
That's right. So you can join at any time. I would say though, if you're only writing for a reality TV show, that's not going to generate mechanical royalties for you. Okay. So a trigger point may be when you're like, wait, there's going to be, my song is going to be recorded and available on these audio streaming services.
Right.
That's a big trigger. Okay. So you're not sending us your actual music, not at all. What you're doing is you are providing data, information, we like to call it metadata, right? You are filling in fields of metadata about your song. The songs that you administer, not every song you've ever written. Remember, going back to my example, right? If the publishing is being handled by a publisher or a publishing administrator, you're not giving us anything. They are giving us everything. But if you are the person, right? If you are the publisher, then you have to essentially register your song with us.
What happens if I start out with it where it's mine and I register it with you, and 2 years later it gets picked up by a publisher? Who is it incumbent on with me or the publisher to reach out and notify you of the change?
Generally, the publisher is going to reach out and notify us. And then there's a process of a letter of direction is what they will send us, telling us from this point forward, this is now going to go here. And there's a process of us changing that and notifying people. So generally the publisher would be sending us that as the acquiring publisher. Right?
And how do you guys, how do you do the matching? I mean, is that, do you have human eyeballs on that, or is it AI that does it and then humans check it? How does that all happen?
Yeah. So let me also just define matching and then tell you how we do it. Right.
Okay.
So you are registering your song with us. So part of that is the song title, the writer names. You're going to tell us all the writer names, and if you know their IPIs, that's the unique identifier that is assigned to a songwriter when they join a performing rights organization like ASCAP or BMI. It's okay if you don't have that. It's okay. It's not required, but we love it, right? Yeah. So song title, writer names, writer IPIs, and then you'll be the publisher, right? Put in your publisher name, or if it's just you, that's okay. And what share of that song you're claiming. Maybe you co-wrote it with somebody else, and they're going to claim their 50% and you're going to claim your 50%. You're not doing this. You're not putting in their share on their behalf. You're going to tell us the song's called this. There were two writers, Bob and Mary, and I'm Bob. Bob's Songs is my publisher name, and Bob's Songs is claiming 50%. Okay, that's the core song information. Now, there's some additional optional fields that we love for you to also fill in, where you would tell us that song was recorded by Susie Singer on Universal Music, right? You're going to tell us about the sound recording of that song that have been made. Not every sound recording ever, but the ones that are going to be on streaming service. Okay? So it's okay if you don't tell us that, but telling us that helps with the matching. So you register the song, hopefully also tell us information about the recordings of that song. And it's like data nirvana when you tell us the ISRC of the recording. Wow. International Standard Recording Code. If you know that, give me that code. Okay. So here's what happens. Here's what matching is. Matching. So understand, every month, digital services like Spotify and Apple Music, what they do is they actually send us sound recording information. So they're going to say Susie Singer is the artist. This is the recording title. Sometimes they give us the songwriter name, sometimes they don't. Okay. So they're going to tell us that recording was streamed this many times and generated this much mechanical royalties for the song. We then have to match that recording information to the song in our database. Okay. And they report that ISRC to us. So do you see how if you've already told us that
Right.
ISRC, it's like, whoa, we have a match, right? So
What if they don't? How do you actually do the match?
So then what we have is we have algorithms, which is a form of AI, okay? We have algorithms that are looking for lots of different fields and trying to see, yeah, we think this is a match. We think, like, we have a very high certainty that we think this is a match. And then we also have a team of humans that manually review things that the algorithm hasn't been able to find matches to. And so we have humans, smart systems, smart technology, all trying to do the matching. And the third thing that helps us with matching is our members. So separate from, hopefully adding that information when you register the song, we also have something we call our matching tool that is available to the members, right? To be a member of the MLC to use this, you also can search to see if there's been any recordings of your song reported to us that our algorithm and our people haven't matched yet. You also can search and even listen to a bit of it. You can even be like, wait, I'm not sure, is that really my song? Or is that somebody only hear it? You can hear it, be like, oh, yep, that's mine. Click a few buttons, and that makes a recommendation to us to match it. And those are all reviewed by our human matching team. And if they're like, yep, that's a match, there you go, right? So we have smart humans, MLC staff members, smart systems, and we've enabled our members to help with that too.
That's all great. Yeah, because we've all seen and heard the nightmares about people reaching out to their PROs because they heard their song on a TV show, and it's not that efficient to collect $6.
If you know there's been a recording of it up on a streaming service, right? You can search in that matching tool and make sure that sound recording they reported to us is matched to your song.
And there's no hidden fees involved in this. There's nothing that we're not disclosing. I mean, it does sound too good to be true, but
honestly, songwriters and their advocates fought really hard for this. So it's too good to be true, but it was, there was a lot that went into them getting it set up this way that there's no fee to join, there's no operating costs get paid for out of royalties, the money is earning interest, that interest gets paid to rights holders. None of that was sort of an accident. That was all rights holders, the publishing advocates, songwriter advocates pushing the digital services to agree to those. So that's how we got this.
I'm shocked that they did, quite frankly, because I've seen examples where they were less agreeable, but won't get into that. So you guys aren't just, I know, I read this on the website, and I remember that Michael Ames, who first told me about the MLC, said they do so much to educate. Obviously, you are kind of the tip of the spear, or maybe tip of the trident. You said there are other people that educate as well. What are some examples of things that the MLC does to educate people about this stuff?
Yeah, great question. Well, this is one example.
There you go.
We connect with people like you to help get the word out and meet people where they are. So, firstly, I mean, I'm totally biased in this, but I think it was pretty awesome that the MLC hired an educator to help educate people. That's a newbie. That's a new thing. Other companies haven't done that. You won't find a head of educational partnerships that, other CMOs generally, right? There is no such title or role. We created it. So we do lots of things. So if you also remember the timeline when we're talking about when we got started,
it
was 2020. You remember that thing?
Yeah, I do.
That thing called COVID. So, we started with everything being on, Zoom webinars, right? So many Zoom webinars where we're helping explain this with slides that, walk you through it, and then tons of time for questions. So we started off really helping get that word out with a combination of webinars and lots of information on our website, like infographic diagrams, frequently asked questions, right? And then once the world opened up again, we started going to lots of conferences. So some of my friends who are touring musicians, they like to tease me that they're like, you tour as much as I do. But I'm not playing live. I'm at conferences explaining this stuff. So it's a little fun inside joke between me and my touring musician friends. So we're at a lot of music industry conferences, whether it's giving a dedicated workshop to explaining all this or being on a panel talking about this, right? We also have grown the number of videos on our YouTube channel so that now they kind of fall into 3 categories, right? One are recordings of webinars. A lot of those are sort of that hour-long format, maybe 30 minutes of a presentation and questions. The next are instructional videos, like how to register a song with the MLC, how to use the matching tool, right? So in that case, it's a demo. It's a full-on, share screen, click here, and then you click there, right? So instructional videos. And then we've got some short animated videos like the one you saw that are, like little bite-sized nuggets that help explain, some core concepts in usually 3 minutes or less. So our YouTube channel's got all that kind of stuff on there. And then a lot of what I do in addition to, creating some of those materials is we connect with educators at the college level who are teaching, teaching music. Like we connect with the College Music Society, we connect with MIA, as you mentioned, the Music and Entertainment Industry Educator Association, and we connect with APME, which is the Association for Popular Music Education. And, in all those instances, we are providing materials, information to professors, right, to then take back to their classes to teach about it. And with APME, it's got a growing group of high school and younger even music teachers as well, teaching popular and contemporary music. And, inevitably they wade into the topics of music business. So we're helping teach the teachers and give them materials to get that word out to their students. So, that helps at least get I realize it's quite a small population that are actually studying music in a more formal setting, but it helps get the word to them.
We should work something out. First of all, I'd love to have you guys back for next year's Taxi convention, but we should also think about opening up, I don't know if you'd need 100, 200 seats to get the Rebecca Chappells, who before we went live, we were talking about her, or maybe we were talking about it on the show. Anyway, the heads of the music business programs at colleges that are members of these organizations, get them to come to the road rally so that they can kind of see all this other stuff that's going on, but maybe take the ballroom, which generally doesn't get used in the early evening, and let you guys do your thing, like an MLC sponsored thing for the educators, because we've got a ballroom with 900 seats sitting there that's dark after 6:30 p.m.
Well, I am sure our marketing and outreach team would love to, get involved in a conversation with you and me about that.
Okay.
What I will say is, a lot of the educators who are members of APME and MIA, they get this from me at their conferences already.
Right.
But I'm sure we could grab others who, don't get to those or the College Music Society events. Let's get the word out to more people. That's what I would love to do.
Okay, we have a unique situation at Taxi, something that you may have never been asked before, which is some of our members are baby boomers whose parents were composers, songwriters, what have you, back in the day, and they inherited their parents' catalogs. And in some cases, the music was maybe signed to an indie label, and that label has gone bye-bye. Maybe they got the rights back to it. But there are all kinds of circumstances, especially when you get into legacy catalogs and people who've passed away. So can somebody collect? I'm trying to think of a scenario. So let's say that my dad had an album and he has all the rights. He got all the rights back or never assigned the rights to anybody in his lifetime. Now I own that because I inherited his estate. And it turns out that good old dad put the music out, and it's on Spotify and whatever, but he did it years ago. Can I still collect on that stuff? I mean,
yeah, I mean, if you are legally now, if that, is part of the estate that passed to you,
yeah,
and so you are now basically the heir, the current copyright owner through inheritance, then absolutely, you are entitled to be collecting the mechanical royalties and the performance royalties until that song is no longer protected by copyright. So, absolutely.
Are the rates that were negotiated for the big labels, publishers, what have you, if somebody is a true independent and they are going to handle their own collection of mechanical royalties, which seems kind of dumb to do considering you guys do it and it doesn't cost them anything, why wouldn't they? But are the rates for the independents the same as they are for the larger entities? Is it some sort of mandated statutory rate?
Yeah, it is. Yes. So let's talk about the rate. Exactly.
Okay.
So when you have a compulsory license scenario, right? And as a reminder, that means that the law is granting the license.
Right.
Because in a compulsory license, you don't have the two parties negotiating, right? The licensor and the licensee aren't negotiating. There's a bunch of questions that have to be answered by someone, right? If the law is going to grant a license, the law has to also set a rate and set out how often does it have to be paid and all that kind of stuff, right? So when you have a compulsory license, you also have statutory royalty rates. That's what we call them, statutory royalty rates. And they are set by a panel of 3 judges called the Copyright Royalty Board, or CRB for short. Only a couple months ago, we just put out a whole bunch of educational materials explaining the mechanical royalty rates, including a 6-minute video and some downloadable materials. I will just highlight. If you go to themlc.com/rates, themlc.com/RATES, rates, you will find all that information. So the mechanical royalty rates that apply to compulsory licenses are statutory rates. They're set by the Copyright Royalty Board, and they take a couple different forms. So, and they apply to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you are a little person, doing it on your own, or you are Sony. If it's a compulsory mechanical license, the statutory rate is the same for everyone. There's a rate for CDs and physical products and permanent downloads use the same rate, and it's an amount per unit, okay, per unit. Whereas for streaming, you do end up with an amount per stream, but it's not a set penny number. It's the result of a formula that has to be applied, and it's a complicated formula. It's a 4-step formula. And
is it easier to understand than the PRO formulas, which are impossible?
I think it is easier because it's all very transparent. And the materials we've created, I'm very biased, I must admit, because I created them. I think they do a pretty good job of explaining it. But here's what you have to understand. It is recalculated, right? The things that go into the formula change every month for every service. And then even on a service, let's say it offers music for subscription, it has a subscription model, and it has an ad-supported model. Those are calculated separately, and
wow.
You could end up with a different rate. So the rate that Spotify pays for 1 month is different than what Apple Music pays. And it's different every month. The formula is the same, but things like the total revenue the service made, the total number of streams, right? Those are different every month. So the ultimate amount per stream of the royalties is going to be different every month. It is less than a penny, is a fraction of a penny, but exactly how much differs every month. But right. the information I pointed you to will show you how that's calculated. And what I will say is when it comes to streaming, as a little guy, you can't go negotiate this on your own. It's not possible.
Right.
So, yes, the big streaming services have some direct voluntary licenses with some of the bigger publishers. They're allowed to do that under the law. But, once you get past some of those big services and those big publishers, all of the rest of that is flowing through the MLC. And so, you just as a little person on your own, if Spotify is using this compulsory license, you don't get to go and you can't force Spotify to negotiate with you directly. It's not an option. They are allowed, if your work meets the eligibility criteria to be included on this blanket compulsory license, there it is, right? If they want to negotiate with you, they're welcome to. But, there would have to be a reason for them to do that.
Who were the people that negotiated this? Sounds like they did a great job. Was it like a team of 200 people or 20 people? And how long did the negotiation take?
I think it was probably smaller than 200, but certainly, I think if you Googled, or searched your favorite search engine for, the various parties involved in negotiating the MMA, you'll find some names. Some of the important groups that were involved, certainly from a trade association perspective, the NMPA, National Music Publishers Association, AIMP, Association of Independent Music Publishers, Songwriters of North America, SONA is their acronym, and NSAI, the Nashville Songwriter Association International, which is much bigger than just Nashville. Those were all some examples of some very active, really taking a lead a lot of this, but there were others involved.
Well, thank goodness for them doing this work. I actually went on a lobbying trip one time with Bart Herbison and a bunch of folks from NSAI.
Yeah, Bart has played a critical role in all of it.
And it's very eye-opening. The average American citizen really doesn't know how accessible the people in the Senate and the Congress are. You can set up meetings, and it's funny how many of them play an instrument, and they're much more receptive to musicians than you would think. That because, come on, let's face it, musicians, it's not like the steel or the automotive industry or something much bigger, but they were beyond courteous. They were actually really involved in paying attention. I was very, very impressed. I think I've been on 2 of those trips and was heartened to see our government actually at work.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. It's important to advocate for your rights as a creator. It's important for everybody to advocate for their position.
But most people just don't know that this stuff is going on in the background, and it's going on for their benefit. So I'm glad that you're here and glad that you guys were part of the road rally, because more people need to understand how important this stuff is. So, oops, I got a light having a little meltdown over there. So I have another complicated question. I think it's complicated.
Okay.
Complicated for me anyway. So if somebody signs with a non-exclusive production music library, I wrote a song called I Love Debbie. And now I own the original copyright, I own the master, I own the composition, I control it all, but now I've done a non-exclusive deal with Bob's Music Library, and they maybe retitled it just for their own catalog and tracking purposes. And then I assign it to yet another non-exclusive library, maybe even a third and a fourth one. So I still control the original copyright and the master, and I could then put it on Spotify under the original title that I still own and control. So I would still collect for the Mechanicals on Spotify or wherever else I put it, even though there are other versions that have probably been retitled out there in the wind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think the critical part would be the matching, right? So, if you're putting a sound recording up on Spotify and you are, that is the composition that you are still the core publishing administrator of, then you're going to want to register that song with the correct title that's going to correspond to usually doesn't have to match the sound recording title, but that certainly helps things. And you're going to want to make sure that we're able to connect that particular sound recording with that particular song. If you are allowing that library to retitle and then also authorize it to be recorded and put up on streaming services, and allowing them to collect those royalties, then theoretically, the sound recording that gets made of that would have a different title and would connect to a song that library would register with that alternate title. So they would need to be making sure to give us enough information to match the correct sound recording to the correct song.
Wow. Okay, and one last of these trick questions, which you're very adept at answering questions. They picked the right person for that job. What about music that's been signed to sync agents who don't take any ownership, so you still retain all your ownership? I've seen some sync agents, they may commission 20, 30, 40, 50% depending on the deal they get you. They're not publishers, therefore they take no ownership of the creative works. So then it would all remain with you, Joe, independent musician, to put the stuff up on Spotify, and the sync agent would be able to lay no claim to anything because it's your baby.
Yeah, I mean, unless somehow in your deal with the sync agent, you said they are going to be administering the mechanical royalties, it's yours. You were just authorizing them to secure a different kind of license and collect a different kind of revenue for you than your mechanical royalties.
It's interesting regarding the whole sync agent industry. There are a few states in the country, California being one of them, and it's one where the law came from, that have very specific rules, regulations, if you will, about what is an agent. And in the state of
that's generally about talent agents that are involved in securing employment, not representing intellectual property, which is what a sync agent is really doing. That's
exactly.
Different than if you've got somebody acting as your agent trying to get you a gig as a film composer, right?
Right.
If they're representing your intellectual property, it's I don't believe it meets the definition of most talent agent statutes.
Right. It could go down that road under certain circumstances, but you're right. 95% of the time or better, it's going to be just repping the intellectual property. All right. I think I've covered.
That is really important to highlight because you mentioned this word earlier, and I was like, let me remember not to forget that. The MLC is only allowed to collect digital music, digital mechanical royalties from services in the U.S.
Right.
We do not collect from outside of the U.S. So if the music is streamed on Spotify in the U.S., yes, the mechanical will generally flow through us. If it's streamed on Spotify in Canada or France or Mexico or anywhere else, it is not going to flow through the MLC. What it's generally going to do is flow either directly from Spotify to the publisher if there's a direct deal, or it's going to flow from Spotify in that country to the Mechanical Rights Society in that country, who is then going to pay whoever it is that's acting as the publishing administrator of that song in that country. The MLC can't do that for you. It's not that we don't want to. The law says we are not allowed to, and we are given a very, very tight box to operate in. We can't go outside of the box. So if you do have your music in sound recordings that are streamed on other services around the world, you need to be thinking of ways for you to collect that money, okay? Because it can't flow through the MLC. And generally your options are, if I was to say the most difficult would be to actually become a member of mechanical rights societies in all these other countries. That could be kind of crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
What you can do is some mechanical rights societies, for example, I confirmed this with MCPS in the UK. You could join MCPS even though you're based in the US. You could join them and authorize them to collect your mechanicals from all over the world, excluding the US. You could do that, right? So, and then they will collect them from mechanical rights societies everywhere, but they're going to probably pay you in pounds. I don't know, but my guess is, right? And you'll have to make sure you're dealing with, you're getting paid from a foreign entity. That's another option. If you're here in the US, signing up with a publishing administration service that has global collection, that's an option, right? Or doing a deal with a publisher, a full-on publisher that also has global administration to act as your administrator.
It is so complicated. I'm glad that there are these avenues, but musicians. Like I said at the beginning of the show, it used to be 3 hits and a good stage performance, and you had a record deal and had a shot at making money. Now it's so much very complex. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, and if you are a publisher, the Harry Fox agency could collect your international mechanicals for you.
Interesting. If you're a publisher.
They generally don't work a lot with self-administered songwriters unless you've got like a really sizable catalog that's making money, but they're not quite set up to just deal with, everybody, right? So those are some options for you. And, I will say, you are not going to be able to keep track of all this in your mind, right? To the point you're making about how complicated this is. Just like if you were going to start a restaurant or a dry cleaner or a live venue or anything, you wouldn't try to keep track of everything you need to do in your head. You need to be writing this stuff down, right? And I mean that either get yourself a physical notebook, get yourself a digital notebook, whatever you like, but it's going to take time to learn all this, and you're not going to be able to just ramble it off top of your head the way I do. I've been doing this a long time, and my whole job is to educate people. So everybody I know who knows this stuff, who understands it, they've got great notes that they rely on to help them, and great checklists. Oh, I wrote a new song. What are the things I need to do, right? They don't try to keep track of it in their mind. They've created their own materials to help them run their business.
I am such a fan that I keep a spiral bound notebook with me wherever I go in the business. I've got one at home, got one in the office, and I've saved every one of them going back to 30 days before I started this company 33 years ago. And it's amazing how many times I've been able to pull up notes from things. People laugh at me that I don't use my phone for this, but I've got a week at a glance thing. It's kind of like a day runner, And I was in a lawsuit once, and because I will make notes, I spoke to Serona Elton about this. Contemporaneous evidence, if you're in a lawsuit, to be able to go back and say, look, I've got it in my calendar from that date. So I encourage all of you, you cannot keep it all in your head. I've been in the industry for 49 and a half years. I consider myself pretty well informed. I'm maybe not the smartest guy on the block, but I'm pretty well informed. And I spent 3 hours last night researching this to get my questions together for the show today. And thank God you're so good at this, Serona, because I didn't have to work that hard today, and you made this kind of fun.
I'm so happy. That's my goal. That is my goal, right? I love explaining things for a living.
You do it really well.
You got to write this stuff down and start a notebook. You can't too much for your head.
We should. Sorry, somebody just said when I hit the table, it sounds like a great kick drum. And I've got my microphone stand on a 1/4-inch thick piece of foam, so that doesn't happen. Anyway, we've still got 7.5 minutes left. Do you guys have questions that you would like to ask Serona before we wrap up today's episode? It takes a minute because there's a little delay in the chat room. Question from...
And don't worry, the last thing I'm going to say once we're done with questions is where you can get more answers if the question pops into your mind once we're done.
That was on my list too. Question from Drumbeat Junkie. I have several songs with CD Baby, but not CD Baby Pro. Am I good for MLC registration for those songs? That's a very good question.
Probably not. So let me give you the longer answer on this, right? So when we started having download stores, iTunes and mp3.com and others, soon after that, a number of companies, some of the earliest ones, CD Baby, TuneCore, for example, started offering digital distribution services to independent artists. Certainly revolutionary in terms of access. And over time, those digital distribution companies have realized, they're keen, they're smart, they're savvy, they're paying attention to the needs of their customers. And they started realizing, hey, a lot of these independent artists are also writing the songs they record. And a lot of them don't have a publisher or a publishing administrator. Let's expand our companies to offer additional services in the form of publishing administration, right? So not all digital distributors do this. Some of them, in addition to distributing the sound recordings, they offer publishing administration if you are entitled to it. Obviously, if your sound recording is a cover of something not written by you, they can't administer that publishing for you because you're not entitled to it. And some of them will do things like collect from social media for you, right? These added services. But so they don't happen automatically. If your sound recording is distributed by CD Baby, unless you have also indicated, and I don't know the exact checkboxes on each of them, but unless you have generally also said, yes, please also act as my publishing administrator, then they're not doing that for you. Sound recording distribution is separate from publishing administration. So the best thing, though, to get the 100% certain answer is to check with CD Baby, okay? You could also look up your songs on our public search. So our database is publicly facing. You can go to themlc.com. Up in the top right, it says public search. If you click on that, then you can see all of the musical works information in our database. The law required us to make that public. So you can look up your song and see if it's in there and CD Baby is claiming it, right? If it is, you would see like CD Baby Alpha or Beta, or there's a couple different names they've gone under. But the best bet is to check with CD Baby. Go into your, log into their portal and see, did you sign up for publishing administration services or just digital distribution?
It's amazing how many musicians don't understand that they're doing either an admin deal or a publishing deal when they check that box. They're thinking, oh, sure, if somebody wants to license it for a TV show, sure, go ahead. Yeah, take your little commission. But they don't understand that they can't submit that to Taxi to try and get it into a production music library because it's committing musical bigamy, if you will. Publisher's not going to sign you if you're Yeah, exactly. Nobody does. And you know what? A lot of the music library contracts, when libraries are small and just starting out, they don't have the money to pay a lawyer 5, 10, 20 grand to do a contract. So they will go Frankenstein a contract together from other contracts that they've signed as a composer over the years. And they have conflicting clauses. This is an attorney. I mean, you look at it and go, okay, the words look fancy, but paragraph number 3 conflicts with paragraph number 7. So, yeah. Okay, another question or two before we buzz out of here. Marian Laird says, I wrote music for lyrics by a novelist friend to tie into her novel, and it's available only on CD Baby, but I administer it. I couldn't register it with BMI because she didn't want to join a PRO. Is it copyrighted? Can we get royalties from the MLC? Complex, huh?
There's a lot of facts in there. So I'm going to try my best, but I may end up suggesting that you contact our support team.
Now, I was going to give Marianne your home phone number. Tell her to call you later.
No,
I'm joking.
No.
Okay.
We have a team of people, though, who answers the phone. So you will get a person on the phone. Not a robot. You'll get a person.
Nice.
So, I mean, I think, if you, writing lyrics that have to do with a book. So was there a sound recording made of a song? I'm not completely clear.
She doesn't actually state that.
Right. But assuming there's a sound recording made of a song, somebody made the music and you wrote the lyrics. Hopefully you've agreed. How are you going to co-own the resulting song?
Right.
Let's pretend that you and that other person agreed, you wrote the lyrics, they wrote the music, it's 50-50, and you're each going to handle your own publishing. In that case, yes, absolutely, you can register the song with the MLC and put in both of your writer names and then just claim your 50%. And the other person will have to come along eventually, hopefully soon, but your 50% is not dependent on them taking an action. So you will get paid your 50% of the royalties, assuming, again, this is generating mechanical royalties because it's up on audio streaming service. So there's some facts in there that I don't know enough about, but hopefully that helps point you in a bit of the right direction. You don't have to be a member of the PRO first or anything like that.
She said, no music. It is copyrighted. I made the sound recording. I wrote the music. She wrote the lyrics. She gave me the rights. Very complex. I'm going to have, I don't want to, we've got like a minute left. I don't want to eat it up on this one particular thing. But Serona, I am so grateful, first of all, that you guys sponsored the rally, because we don't charge anybody to come to the rally. We include it with every member's membership fee, and people say it's the best music conference of its kind anywhere on the planet. Woo-hoo. Yeah, I'm really proud of that. This year was our 28th year, and we recognized very early in Taxi that the industry was changing and changing rapidly, and it was no longer just good enough to write 3 great songs and have a great stage performance, that every single independent musician is him or herself a small business and a small business owner. And I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing and how well organized. I spent a lot of time last night after I worked on the questions looking at your various staff members and what all their jobs are. Just the number of positions, the complexity in what you do is really impressive. So I'm grateful. That's all I can say. And thank you for taking the time and doing this. I know that it's now, 8:30 at night, your time.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And I will just say, for those who have questions, go to themlc.com. Don't forget the word themlc.com. And then in the top menu, you'll see the word help. If you click on that, you can call us on the phone Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and usually get a human on the phone in under a minute. You could connect with us via email, or if you're already a member and you're logged into our member portal, you can initiate a live chat with a human during those hours as well. So check out our website, our YouTube channel for the answers. And if you're just not finding what you need, don't hesitate to call us.
One last question, because a couple people have asked this. What was the name of the UK mechanical company that collects globally, including the US?
MCPS.
P. Third letter is P?
Third, P like Paul.
Right. Okay.
Mary, Charlie, Paul, Sam. MCPS. Which I'm sure is not the proper way to do that. But
I know. When I call airlines and I read back my reservation number to them, they go, "What the hell?" Yeah. Apparently, neither of us were Army brats.
No.
Well, you were absolutely delightful, highly informative. Now I know why they gave you the job. I just can't imagine anybody better doing it. And I look forward to seeing you in whatever capacity as soon as I can. And I would love to come back to U of M sometime. Oh, by the way, I mentioned this.
This is the University of Miami symbol, not a gang symbol.
Right.
This is the University of Miami logo, and we have a hand symbol that all of us make. So yeah, we'd love to have you back. Absolutely.
Rob Shirelli, who happens to be my best friend and has 5 Grammys as an engineer, mixer, producer, happens to live 4 houses away from me, also is a UM graduate, and he and I have done stuff together. So he said, Laskow, come on, let's go to Miami, talk to the kids. So we'll talk. Anyway, thank you so much, and see you sooner than later, I hope. Thanks.
Right. Hopefully, yes. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Serona Elton, ladies and gentlemen.